going on, everybody? This is Rick Del Santo. You're listening to Pro Wrestling Wire podcast, part of ProWrestlingWire.net, Helix Rock Radio, which is rockradio.live, each and every Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m. And, of course, the AIWF network. I have a very special guest here today, and Luke Roberts, 35-year veteran of the Ring Wars, I guess you could say, or breaking up the Ring Wars.
Very, very true, Rick. And again, thank you, Pro Wrestling Wire, for having me. Again, happy holidays to all the viewers here. I know that we're in the holiday season, and tonight we're going to be talking pro wrestling here in one of the hotbeds of professional wrestling history, that being the St. Louis area. And again, it doesn't seem like 35 years, but I mean, again, it's one of those, wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
You know, I've only been doing this for like 5-6 years myself, and it's hard to imagine that 6 years has gone by as incredibly fast as it's done. You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally get you. I mean, again, it's one of those where when you sit down and you look at professional wrestling before you blink, I mean, there's a lot of wrestlers that I know who've been in the industry 15, 20, 25 years or more, and they can still remember their first match and what they wore and road trips and all the different things that are there. And again, that's one of the things that's great about professional wrestling is the friendships you make and the experiences that you have are things that you'll carry with you for your lifetime. And again, that's one of the great things about this sport is just the memories that are made, not only for the fans, but those that are involved as well.
Yeah, I've made some of the best friends in my life through professional wrestling, and I appreciate that.
Most definitely. And I mean, again, there are several people that I wouldn't be where I am today without. I mean, when you talk about being in the ring and competing or being a referee or being a trainer or being a broadcaster, there are so many different components and things that you see when it comes to professional wrestling that, I mean, again, you sit there and the bonds you make are those that simply put you're going to have for a lifetime. And I mean, again, there's several people that I can tell you right now. As a matter of fact, I talked with a very good friend of mine that actually, when I first actually started competing in the ring, that was far too many years ago, but I had an opportunity to talk with him. And I mean, again, we've been friends for the better part of 30 years. And I mean, again, it's the experiences and the bonds.
Yep. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you got interested in the world of professional wrestling and getting involved?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, and this is kind of an inside joke to a friend of mine in the wrestling industry. Picture it. Piedmont, Missouri, 1982. Okay, now that I've got my Golden Girls reference out the way, when you sit there and you look at pro wrestling, I remember when I was a little itty bitty kid, I was probably 5 years old, and I had the opportunity to be sitting on my grandmother's floor. And I mean, again, to put the picture in perspective, that really ugly, wafer thin, brown, orange carpet that, I mean, again, was just horrible. I mean, it was like basically sitting on concrete. But I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom was on the couch. My grandma was in a recliner. My dad was in a recliner. And we had to be, no questions asked, 6:05 Eastern, 5:05 Central. We had to be sitting in our chairs, in our spots, watching professional wrestling. Now, this wasn't the WWF or the WWF. I grew up on the idea of Georgia Championship Wrestling. And I'm talking back in the days of the Thunderbolt Pattersons, of Ole and Gene Anderson, Magnum TA, Mr. Wrestling 2, Ronnie Garvin, the Sawyers. I mean, that's where my first real grasp of professional wrestling was. And I mean, that was the standard for me. And it went from there to, again, the media boom of the mid 80s. And I mean, again, I was fortunate because not only was I a wrestling fan, but my brother was a huge wrestling fan. He was one of those where he spent all the time at wrestling at the Chase. He would stay after and go to places like the Coruscant Room and get the autographs and get the posters and get all those kinds of things. And I'll tell you right now, in the 80s, we had World Class, we had the WWF when AWA was on ESPN. If it was anything major wrestling related, it was going on in this house. And I mean, again, when you get to sit there and you see all these different, and again, it was seeing the territories, which was awesome to me in retrospect, because you look at it, you have the Georgia style of wrestling. Then you go to World Class, where you had a lot of great storytelling. I mean, again, I think back to the matches with the Von Erichs and the dynamic duo of Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. wrestlers like Killer Tim Brooks, Iceman King Parsons, the Fabulous Freebirds, among others. And then you watch the AWA, which is the Vern Gagne style of wrestling. And I mean, again, I was hooked, and it's not just a hook then to get me involved. Now, you could ask my wife if she was going to be on the show. She could tell you, up until a couple months ago, it was every night. I'd have to still sit in front of the television, whether it's watching New Japan on Roku or going on to Pluto and watching old AAA, or watching through the world of YouTube, watching stuff from like the Catch Wrestling Association. Once it gets in your blood, not just as a fan, but as a wrestler or whatever, it doesn't go away. And I mean, again, it's been in my blood since I was 5 years old.
So you got into it a lot younger than I did. I got into it really late, which, was always a dream of mine, so to speak. But it sounds like a lot of our youth were very kind of parallel in a way, growing up in the 1980s. And, I'm reaching 50, but I grew up watching World Class on ESPN every day after school. The AWA, I would rush home, never do my homework. World Class was on. Sorry. 5 o'clock, no problem. AWA, whatever was on. And it's just amazing to think that, so many things were harder to grasp back then or get to it back then. And then now in 2024, going into 2025, how easily things are accessible, especially professional wrestling. It's at another peak, so to speak, but obviously things are different with technology. There's wrestling on every night of the week. You have multiple shows to choose from, basically 7 days a week.
Very true, Rick. And I mean, again, when you look at it now, and you hit a point that I can't believe in my age. And again, it's one of the things that really amazes me is the idea of how close we are to that new, I don't want to say a new attitude era or a new renaissance or a rebirth of professional wrestling, but you're looking at the idea of, for example, the WWE and AEW. WWE's going to Netflix. You've got AEW that's got its dealings with Max. You've got so many different live stream like New Japan World and Honor Club and things like that. If you would have told wrestlers back in the 1980s that there'll be so much stuff that, I mean, literally is at your fingertips. I mean, it's just unreal when you can go back. And again, you go back into things like Peacock and you can pull stuff from the Mid-Atlantic days. You can pull stuff from Smoky Mountain. You can pull countless different wrestling promotions. And again, to me, it's just amazing how wrestling has transformed as we go forward now. And it's crazy as it sounds, going into 2025 in a little over a week's time.
That's funny that the WWE has always been ahead of the game in a way in changing the landscape, even going into 2025 with their Netflix deal. It's just, they're just always innovative on, ahead of the game, I guess, you know what I mean? And influencing others.
And again, that's one of those things where when you sit back and you look at it, I mean, again, they've always seemed to be at the cutting edge, but there's been a lot of things too that have kind of forced the hand of the WWE a little bit. I mean, you go back to the Global Wrestling Network, and when Jeff Jarrett and TNA was going to go into the idea of going into a streaming service. You've got, like I said, you've got Honor Club, you've got New Japan World. And that's one of the things too. A lot of people say, oh, well, the WWE, they transformed pro wrestling. No, New Japan World's been doing it for years. It's just one of those where somebody in a corporate office in Stamford, Connecticut, finally put two and two together and realized that there is a market for these kinds of things. And they looked at it. And again, a lot of people say it's about putting people in seats. But when you can go back and look at just, I mean, literally I could go to my computer right now or my television, click on a handful of buttons, and I'm magically transported 30, 40, 50 years ago in the world of pro wrestling. And when you look at things like the WWE, they've always been the one that they're going to go in, they're going to push all their chips in. And again, giving them props, because right now, I said on January 6th, and if you go back and you look at the matches that have already been announced, they're not just going halfway on this.
No,
they're going all in.
It's going to be a pay-per-view quality television show.
Most
It's
definitely.
yeah, it's kind of amazing. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm getting some snacks. I'm going to be sitting down there on my rear end and watching it.
Well, one thing too, and I mean, you talk about that is the idea that, I mean, there's going to be, and that's one of the things I've really grown to love in the last few years is the idea, and I won't lie to you, I'm huge into New Japan.
Hmm.
And I'm really looking forward not only to seeing what Wrestle Kingdom is going to bring forward on the 4th, but also what I don't want to say new brand, but new identity of Night 2 being Wrestle Dynasty.
Right.
And I mean, again, where else can you go? I believe it's Stardom, CMLL, AEW, and I believe it's ROH. And that's just a women's matchup. The winner gets to call their shot for a championship opportunity. How many companies can say that you have wrestlers from all those promotions just in one match?
Yeah.
And that's one of those when you sit there, you look at that and you go right into January 6th. And then you're going right into the Rumble. And I mean, again, the road to WrestleMania always piques the curiosity. And I'll tell you, I mean, I think back to a lot of times where, to me, the Royal Rumble is much more of a big to do in my household than WrestleMania itself. I mean, I can't tell you the number of wrestlers that have come to my house and sit and we either order pizza or get wings or cook something on the grill and just sit and watch that kind of event because, like I said, that's one of those that grips your attention, and that's what makes wrestling so unique.
That's my favorite event of the year, the Royal Rumble. That's WWE wise, because it's something I look forward to. It's usually consistently good in quality. Sometimes there's some surprises, and not always, but it's the most enjoyable show, and it kicks off the year. You know what I mean? Or the season, so to speak, of really good, putting in their all for shows.
Well, and you know something, Rick, when you sit there and you look at, I was watching something today, and there have been several different media outlets, and again, not Pro Wrestling Wire by any stretch, but I've heard a lot of different pro wrestling officials or media who said, "Oh, Triple H hasn't mastered the booking of a Royal Rumble." It's like, guys, listen. When it comes down to it, don't be constantly overwatching this stuff. Let people enjoy what they've grown accustomed to. Let them enjoy the Royal Rumble for what it is. Let them enjoy WrestleMania for what it is. And that's one of the things where they're not going to disappoint. They always deliver a great product, and that's the way it's going to be, hands down.
Absolutely. I agree. Let's talk a little bit about your career. Do you mind if we jump into your career?
Oh, we can jump into my career. It's been a long, long winding road when it comes to professional wrestling. One of the things I find ironic, Rick, when I talk about my career is, first of all, is if you look at it from my family. My brother, as I said, longtime fan of professional wrestling, and he happened to just totally out of the blue, he was doing his day job at the time. He was working as a mobile entertainer. And it just happened that we were doing an event at a place called the Village Bowl in Cahokia Heights, Illinois. And we happened to run into a friend of ours who we knew wrestled down at the South Broadway Athletic Club, a man by the name of John Blackheart. And John Blackheart was a cruiserweight well before his time. And I'm not talking cruiserweights from flying all around the ring and whatnot. He was a solid 200, 210 pounds, the kind of guy you don't want to meet in a back alley any night of the week. And it just happened. My brother, he's like, "Hey, you're a big guy." At the time, he was about my height, about 5'10", 5'11", but was pushing 400 pounds. He's like, "You need to get into the wrestling industry." And one thing led to another. And while my brother was doing the in-ring competing, I was learning, and a lot of people don't get to do this, I was learning a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff from 10, 11 years old. I mean, running sound, running ring jackets, helping write news, like program articles, making sure that things are being sold, taking notice of what's selling. And it was so cool because even at 10, 11 years old, being able to see these things and There's a lot of names here in the St. Louis area, guys like John Blackheart, like the late Tony Costa, the man who for years was behind the South Broadway Athletic Club in the MMWA. Herb Simmons. I know a lot of people through the professional wrestling world know Herb Simmons from his work in SICW as well as the Cauliflower Alley Club. And I mean, when it was acceptable for me to get in the ring, Blackheart pulled no punches. He said, you're going to go in here and you're going to know how it is. And basically for the better part of 3 years, usually 2 nights a week, I would get in that ring and I wasn't being treated like a 14, 15, 16-year-old. I was expected to be able to go in there with guys who had 10, 12, 15 years under the belt and be able to go. And I remember my other trainer, my brother was one, John Blackheart was another one that a lot of fans may or may not know, a gentleman by the name of the Human Wrecking Ball, Pete Madden. Very well known here in the Midwest. Has done a lot of things with promotions like Metro Pro, Gateway Championship Wrestling, the MMWA, among others. And I remember, I mean, I'm a little 16-year-old kid, and I'm wrestling, training's about done, and he's like, stay here, don't move. Like, and he picks me up, he slams me, and I'm like, why? Says, here's why. Guy tosses him a chair, does a chair assault. Right there in the training ring. And I'm like, literally my jaw drops down to about my sternum. And the crazy thing was, I was able to walk away. And he's like, that's why you do what you do. And again, it just kind of snowballed from there. I mean, again, having an in-ring career, I spent better part of probably, I want to say about 6-7 years in the ring on a regular basis as far as a in-ring competitor goes. Suffered my fair share of injuries. I mean, I was only about 120 pounds, but it went from there. And I'll tell you, Rick, I mean, the people I met, it was great and wonderful. And it's thankful that this coming June, when I go into the Independent St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame, that one of my trainers, Pete Madden, will be going in with me in that class as well. But it's the idea of, I really think the biggest thing in the professional wrestling game is, how are you willing to be ahead of the curve? And I know you and I have talked about that on a couple of occasions, both here as well as off there, that you got to be ahead of the game. And that's why I'll be upfront. That's why I feel that I've had the longevity I've had, because when one door closes, another opens, and that kind of leads me to the next phase of my career.
And so you decided to become a referee after that?
Yeah, usually it's a lot safer, but I learned very quickly that it's not always the case. And it's kind of ironic, Rick, that me getting into the professional wrestling industry and being a referee, a lot of people say a lot of things just happen by chance. And I had been, back in 04, 05, I had been training a few wrestlers for a promotion called Mid-America Extreme here in Alton, Illinois. And it just happened that I was refereeing an event for another promotion. And there was a gentleman from a group who was at the time was known as the Lethal Wrestling Alliance, now known as St. Louis Anarchy. A lot of the followers of Pro Wrestling Wire are probably very familiar with them. And as soon as I got done, he literally tapped me on the shoulder and said, "How would you like to come work for us?" And it just kind of snowballed from there. I spent a good chunk of time with St. Louis Anarchy, having the opportunity to referee for the likes of Alex Shelley, Chris Sabin, Rachel Summerlin, Delirious. I could go on and on and on. But then that would lead to me getting the opportunity to referee with my home promotion, of all places, Dynamo Pro Wrestling. And interesting story. I remember there were countless wrestlers. And again, if you're in any major wrestling hotbed, there's going to be countless promotions. And the gentleman who at the time ran, it's kind of weird because you had a promotion called MRW, Midwest Renegade Wrestling. When they close their doors, out of that comes Gateway Championship Wrestling. And if you get a chance, I got to tell you, check out Gateway Championship Wrestling. There's a lot of great matches online. That was where you see a lot of people like Matt Sydal, Delirious, Daisy Hayes, Mischief, Dingo, among others who had come through the doors. But I remember walking in the door, and the guy at the time who was really kind of an executive with Dynamo Pro had issues with my brother. And I was sitting there, and basically I had to sit there and listen to him talk trash about him for the better part of 30 minutes. And the last thing I said was, I'm not my brother. I've never claimed to be. Your roster knows what I'm capable of as an official. If you want me to come in, great. If not, thank you for your time. And I walked out the door. And now it's been almost 15 years. And like I said, they're like family to me. And I mean, again, it's staying one step ahead of things. It's always been, when they had their announcer, leave the promotion. It's like, hey, Luke, can you do this? Okay. And then there you go. And then had an opportunity, about a decade ago. There was a gentleman, by the name of TNT Kenny G. A lot of people may or may not know him. He is the late father of one Santana Garrett. And they were going to do a charity event to say, hey, he had just recently had a stroke, and the title of the event was Stroke Ain't No Joke. And I know there's a lot of grammar people who are like, no, that's not going to fly. But I was like, no, Kenny's a great talker. I'm not even going to remotely fib about that. Kenny Garrett was a phenomenal guy.
I think I saw him on TV when Santana Garrett worked for WOW, right? I think that he was on an episode sitting in the front in a wheelchair, I believe. Now, I think that, I'm not very familiar with him, but I knew, what her father had done, and, and I saw him on that show like one time. This was, I don't know, years ago.
And it was one of those, at that time, I remember watching the episode myself, and Kenny wasn't in the best of health at that point, but he was always a good talker. And I knew he was still having some issues. So they were like, oh, okay, let me do media. Let me talk to the newspapers. Let me talk to this, that, and the whatnot. And they're like, okay, you want to do this? You can do this. And I mean, again, it was a great experience, and it's given me the opportunity to be where I am today. I mean, I do want to share one story for you. And I think your viewers will definitely get a kick out of this. I officially agreed with Dynamo Pro to become their media director on January 1. We had a show, I believe it was on January 3rd. So I'd officially been on the job in my role for 2 days. First thing is, they're projecting a blizzard, as they called it here in the St. Louis area, Snowmageddon. We wound up, I think, with like 13 inches of snow come in that night. It was horrible. And I'm sitting there going, okay, let's get this done. Let's let everybody be safe. Let's let everybody get home. We're getting things going. First match, tag team comes into the ring. Tag team by the name of the Black Hand Warriors. They accomplished a lot in WLW, Dynamo Pro, several other promotions here in the Midwest. One of the gentlemen was climbing the ropes to kind of taunt the crowd, stepped on the bottom rope, puts his foot on the second rope. No sooner is his foot on the second rope, bottom rope snaps. I mean, I'm talking turnbuckle bolt just shatters, everything goes. There is no saving this rope. I look at my broadcast colleague, Chris Rodell, and he kind of gives me a look because he had taken over my job as an announcer. And I remember him mouthing the words, "What do I do now?" And my reply was this. Had no answer whatsoever. And again, since that point in time, I mean, again, it's had a lot of great opportunities. And I'll be honest, there's been a lot of times along the road that wrestling has been very therapeutic to me.
Yes. Sorry. Had trouble unmuting my microphone.
Hey, I'm thankful the fact it's not me. You can talk to a lot of people. I have that notorious history about the microphone going haywire. But like I said, a lot of people in professional wrestling, Rick, they look at it from the idea of their bodies get beat up, they get worn down, they mentally get worn out. And
yeah,
I remember after we did Stroke Ain't No Joke, I found out that my wife and I, after many years of being around pro wrestling, found out she was finally expecting.
Oh, wow.
And I always told myself when she was expecting, once my child was here, that's it. I'm done. I've had a good run. That's the way it is. Found out in November that she was expecting twins. So my shock value was at an all-time high. And unfortunately, right before the holidays, actually almost 10 years ago to the day, in the span of a little over a week, my wife lost both of our daughters at 20 weeks.
I'm sorry.
And out of that, I remember, of all things, it was the week between Christmas and New Year's, and I was sitting with my friend Chris Rodell, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I mean, nothing makes you process that. And actually, Chris Rodell brought up the idea of, if you feel up to it, why not put on a benefit for the organization that's helping you and your wife deal with this? And I was like, that's a pretty good idea. And I went and I talked to the management, and management said, let's do it. And within 3 months, Dynamo Pro had more sponsors for that one event that they had ever had. A lot of professional wrestling companies, they're like, a portion of the proceeds. We were able to say that night through an anonymous donor that 100% of the gate went to the charity.
That's amazing.
And we were able to donate, by the time everything was done, a little over $2,000 to Share Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support. And it was ironic that I found out well after the event was done, after everything was taken care of, everything was documented. I went to my boss, Crystal Yunt. She's in charge of talent relations with Dynamo Pro. I'm like, Crystal, I don't know if you're going to tell me. I don't care if you tell me, but can you tell me who this anonymous donor was? Can you tell me who was the person that made this a reality, that we could do such great things for this charity? And I found out that the venue, which was, I think, the only cost we had, and they gave us a great deal. I mean, the building seats like 600 people. And I found out that, of all people, my own father paid for the building that night. He paid for it out of his own pocket. And when I sit there and look at it to this day, I mean, again, wrestling has its long roads. It has its up and downs. But since that point in time, I mean, wrestling has really kind of given me a family. And I mean, again, it's one of those things where when you look at professional wrestling, Rick, I mean, my brother, he's 11 and a half years older than me. He spent better part of a decade in the ring. Total irony that my nephew, by marriage, is continuing on the family legacy in a program that was on Discovery recently, Big Little Brawlers. My nephew is Ivar the Micro, and he's still to this day traveling the country, doing what he does. And again, I want to give a shout out to all the guys and gals over at Big Little Brawlers, Jack and everybody over there. Again, great promotion. Had a great opportunity to go see them just a few months ago when he was here in our area. But I mean, again, it's one of those things where as time's gone on, you got to adapt. And when it comes to being in the ring, I know full well there's a lot of people who overstay their welcome. I got back in the ring about 2.5 months ago as a referee, and I can tell I'm not as great as I once was. But when it comes down to it, I mean, again, I know I can still go, and as long as I can contribute, as long as I can give input, not only to the wrestlers that are inside the ring, but to share the historical legacy of professional wrestling in our area, I know that I'm going to have a place in this wonderful, crazy world that's pro wrestling.
Jimmy Valiant, Boogie Woogie, man.
Legendary Boogie Woogie.
Wait a minute, baby. Wait a minute. Hang on.
What are you doing around
What was that calling you, brother?
This is our neighborhood.
You dumb a young man's game.
You should be retired, Boogie.
Wait a minute, boys! Let me take a bite of my king dog.
You say King Dog?
King Dog.
Is that what you said? What happened?
Come on, boy!
Don't let hunger bully you. Get yourself a king dog, and you too can become a super hunger fighter.
It's an amazing story. So does your brother involved at all still, or is he?
It's an interesting thing with him. I'll level. He had an opportunity when I was training wrestlers back in 04, 05. He wanted to get back in the ring, and he was a guy. He was probably, and I know a lot of people hear this, he's probably the most athletic big man that I've ever seen. I remember there were a few matches when I'm about 120, 130 pounds where I drew the short straw and wound up having to go against him. I've never seen a 400-pound man throw a sidekick and get you right there in the point of the jaw. I've never seen a guy at 400 pounds who can go out there and actually do a sunset flip, who can do a roll up, who can do a mahi straw cradle. He could do all those things. And he kind of got where a lot of people get once they've spent their time in the world of pro wrestling. They kind of get a little bit salty about it. They get a little bit of sourness about it. And he comes to events now and again, but he is kind of disconnected. I will say in the last few months, he's kind of gotten a little more involved. I wish somebody would go and pick his brain, because that's like a lot of wrestlers to this day, and you hear it all the time. How are you going to improve? You learn from the past. You learn from the wrestlers that have gone out there and have been on the roads and have competed in front of the big crowds, and see what kinds of things they can do. I had one I just sent out today to a friend of mine, Brutal Bob Evans. And I'll tell you right now, if you get an opportunity, make it a point. You need to follow him on social media. You need to look at his stuff online, because Brutal Bob is the name says it all. He will tell you how it is. You want to be a success? These are the kinds of things you need to do. And you got guys like him, like Dr. Tom Pritchard and JPWA, and you've got guys like the Dynamo Pro Dojo and the Forge and countless other training facilities with wrestlers who've been up and down the roads.
Right.
And again, to be able to impart wisdom, I mean, that's the biggest thing for a professional wrestler sometimes. And it sounds cold, but you got to sit down, close your mouth, open your eyes, open your ears, and you will learn more in a matter of minutes than some people do in their entire careers.
Right. Yeah. I know that off air, not in one of our conversations online, you were telling me about that you attended the Cauliflower Alley Club. I always get tongue-tied trying to say that. Sorry.
Hey, you're not the only one, Rick. You're not the only one. I feel very fortunate, because I always, for years, have had it on my bucket list. I mean, I've been around wrestling a long time. It doesn't look like it with a baby face, but I had an opportunity. I actually had 3 friends of mine who pushed this hardcore with me. One was the late Kenny Garrett. Second was a gentleman by the name of Tom Simon. He's been a referee in St. Louis for years. He was the voice of traditional championship wrestling down in Arkansas. Used to be run by Matt Riviera. He had some dealings with Burt Prentice, the late Burt Prentice, down with his promotion, USA Championship Wrestling. But they were both like, you need to go, you need to go, you need to go. And I'm like, okay, you are guys I've learned a great deal from. When I get the opportunity, I will go. But the man who really pushed me the most to go is a man who's one of my best friends in the world of pro wrestling, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Drew Abenhouse. He is the voice of SICW. He used to be a part of the Ringsiders podcast here in the St. Louis area. Was very heavily affiliated with a wrestling website called Missouri Wrestling Revival. And he's like, if you don't go and you keep saying you're going to go, eventually it's going to pass you by. And I'm like, okay, Drew, you're right. You go. And I had, hands down, probably one of the greatest 3 days in my life. As a matter of fact, actually, I'm going to see here real quick. Yeah, I got it here in my office. Hopefully I don't knock everything down on the show. Had an opportunity right here to participate, as many people know, playing cribbage. Again, the sport of wrestlers back in the day. Wound up winning second place in the Cauliflower Alley cribbage tournament. Another good Broad story. I'm there, and first round, I got no worries. And again, it was a great friend of mine, Brian Westcott, out from the Pacific Northwest. But my second match was against the man who basically is the icon of the CAC cribbage tournament, that being the one, the only Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. Bob Orton has won this thing about 17 times. They should probably name it. I know it. It was actually called. Now it's called. I think it's the Dick the Destroyer Buyer cribbage tournament. Bob is probably going to wind up having some kind of a recognition in this for the number of times he's won the tournament. And not only did I win, but I won in 2 straight. And I remember the first night when they had the ceremonies and all, and I remember this guy shouting, and again, I'm not going to say specifically because it's definitely kind of offhanded. It's like, whose butt did Bob kick to get to the finals this year? And a friend of mine, Bulldog Bob Brown Jr., came up to the microphone, was talking about it. He's like, Bob's not in the finals. And the crowd was just, their jaw dropped. And they're like, who was it? And then he had the point, it was this guy. And he points at me. I'm about 3 tables back. He points at me, and he beat him in 2 straight. And the crowd is just booing. I felt like I was in my WrestleMania moment, because at that point, I'm like, if I'm going to go in a blaze of glory. And I got up and I did the whole Hogan. And I was sitting there, and granted, I didn't win the tournament. I wound up coming in second place, but when they called me up to get my plaque and during the Hall of Fame, or during the awards ceremony, I made peace with Bob. And that's one of those, I'll share that story for another day. But again, if you had the opportunity, CAC is a great organization. From the top of the list, Brian Blair, Darla Staggs, Rich Engling, Herb Simmons, Vance Nevada. I mean, from top to bottom, they are a great organization to be a part of. And I'll tell you right now, Rick, if CAC, if you can't take 3 days to go to Vegas and enjoy professional wrestling in that avenue, had the opportunity at same under a year to go to the Wrestling Hall of Fame in Waterloo, Iowa. Now that was an experience. When you're sitting there, we went, first night we were at a trivia night, and all I'm hearing from, it's like an L-shaped building, and we're sitting there at our table and we're eating food and having a good time. And all of a sudden you hear these 2 guys just talking trash. I mean, literally, they could say it here and you could hear it without your internet. That's how loud they were. And we're sitting there, and one of my buddies is like, who is that? I'm like, you don't know who that is? Jerry Briscoe and JBL are sitting at the other side. They've already had a few beverages of the evening, and they were just letting it go. But I mean, again, the opportunity to, and again, it was cool because I got to meet people like Rock Riddle. And again, if you haven't had a chance to find Mr. Wonderful Rock Riddle, do it. You will not be disappointed. Guys like Bill DeMott was there, having an opportunity to meet one of my first real favorites in the world of pro wrestling, the legendary Thunderbolt Patterson, Les Thatcher, Jerry Briscoe. I mean, it was a great experience. I had an opportunity to watch the Impact Pro Wrestling event that first night that we were there, or sorry, second night that we were there. And it was just, I mean, from top to bottom, it was a great experience. And again, that's one of the things that makes pro wrestling unique, is the idea of where you can see what the wrestlers have put in, their blood, the sweat, the tears. And I mean, again, when you can say that you got to sit down and you got to sit and have dinner with Tommy Rich in the Plaza Casino, or you get the opportunity at Hash House at Go-Go to be sitting there and talking with one half of the Rock and Roll Express, Robert Gibson, or the idea of sitting there at the Wrestling Hall of Fame in Iowa and having dinner and having a conversation with Haku. Those are the kinds of things, like, as you said at the top of the program, those are the kinds of things that you always remember. And again, it's a lot on my bucket list. And one of the things that's here in my office that I treasure to no end are two things. One, I got an opportunity. I have a picture with J.J. Dillon, and I had an opportunity. The picture I have is not only autographed by him, but it has a copy of, I'm holding a copy of his book, and he's showing the four fingers. And the other one, which it was ironic, I went to the CAC. I win this. I go to the Hall of Fame, and I managed to get my picture autographed. That's the fan in me. One side of the picture is JBL. Other side, referee James Beard.
Great guy.
How much better can it get?
Yeah. It's funny because you've mentioned a good portion of these guys I've had on the show. I've had James Beard on the show. Herb Simmons has been on the show. Brian Blair's been on the show. Bob Cooks is about to come on the show in the beginning of the year. So, I'm a history nerd when it comes to wrestling. And that goes back to early part of the conversation when we first signed in our access. I could watch wrestling every day of the week. Half the time I'm on the Savoldi network watching classic wrestling from the Savoldi footage that they own, whether it's the oddball USWA Texas stuff, the Wild West wrestling, the random AWA shows that they put on or helped bring over to weird parts of this side of the country, what have you. So yeah, it's kind of amazing the stories that you're telling here. Like, I'm kind of freaking out inside saying this is so awesome.
Well, and I do have to share this one. Again, talking about being ahead of the curve, through media, I've had an opportunity to kind of jump into the foray in the world of professional wrestling with being a part of several different podcasts, including the Wrestle Talk podcast out of Kansas City, Interstate 70 Sports Media, and Falls Count Everywhere podcast here out of St. Louis. Interesting story. We had an interview it was about 2-3 weeks before CAC, and had a gentleman by the name of Santana Jackson come on the program. And he was, the internet was blowing up on him. And we're sitting there thinking, okay, he is on the show, looking forward to seeing him out in Vegas, competes in a match, and was just totally mind blown. And had an opportunity we were going to interview him. And now it's like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. We're in Vegas. I'm beyond worn out. And Santana is signing autograph after autograph, and we're having to follow him down Fremont Street to be able to conduct the interview. But, again, it's one of those things, Rick, when it comes down to it, I would not trade it for anything in the world. And like I said, I'm looking forward to in June 22nd here in St. Louis, being a part of the independent St. Louis Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and being inducted. It shows that not only myself, but there are a lot of great wrestlers, both male and female, who've given of their time. And just to give you an idea, I know we're going to talk about it briefly here in a minute, but to be in a class with the likes of my trainer, Pete Madden, former Wrestling at the Chase referee and wrestler referee announcer, Eddie Smith, Handsome Harley Race is going to be inducted. Mischief is going to be inducted for those that follow a lot of the Ring of Honor stuff and a lot of wrestling overseas. To be in a class, Bishop Stevens is another one that's out there. To be in a class with those individuals who, a lot of them I grew up watching, and to be recognized with a group like that, it just amazes me how not only how much have I been able to experience, but by the same token, how much people respect what I've done in this industry. And again, if you tell me 35 years ago that you would call me a Hall of Famer, I'd say you're out of your mind. But to have so many people come up and say, hey, Luke, what do you think about this? What can I do better? What can I do about this? What can I do about that? It just amazes me how it doesn't matter whether I'm a 5-year-old kid watching it or like you said earlier, nearing 50 myself, and having people come up to me and say, hey, did you like this? Is there things I can do better? It just amazes me how wrestling has come full circle for me.
You're also part of the board of directors of the Hall of Fame, correct?
That is correct. And like I said, we just got done with a meeting here a little over a week ago. And I'll tell you right now, they're already looking at some names for the next induction class. And I'm going to tell you right now, when you look at the St. Louis area, I mean, there's a lot of people. Like I mentioned earlier on, Dingo, Daisy Hayes, Mischief, Delirious, Matt Seidel, Mike Seidel, names a lot of people may not know, like Black Glove Butch Fletcher, like Bama Bodine, guys like Tim the Punisher Ferris, guys like Kane got to start here in the greater Midwest and the greater St. Louis metro area. There's a lot of pro wrestling, and again, it's one of those where I feel fortunate that St. Louis has always been a hotbed for pro wrestling. And to me, my biggest thing is simple. I don't care what promotion you wrestle for. I don't care who pays your paycheck. At the end of the day, if you're able to go inside those guardrails, or if you're to be fortunate enough to step inside the squared circle, as we call it, to be involved in professional wrestling, that right there, you have my respect. And all these people in this area, there's a lot of people who professional wrestling today on the independent level as well as on the national and international levels would not be the same if it weren't for the men and women who step inside the ring. And again, I want to give a shout out to all the members of the Hall of Fame board, because they've been working nonstop since last June's induction. And I'll tell you, the 26 class right now is already shaping up to be a potential of a humongous class. And again, shameless plug here, tickets are going to be available soon. If you can make the opportunity to come to the St. Louis area, you will not be disappointed. You will have a great time, and hearing from some of these individuals who traveled the world doing what we all love, not just from being inside the ring, but as pro wrestling fans, what we love. I'll tell you right now, it's going to be a once in a lifetime experience. And I hope that people can take these things and experience them, because it increases your fandom that much more.
I would love to come down there for something like that. You know, I do convention weekends and stuff. Cauliflower Alley Club, said it right that time. I'd love to get out there. I've been invited. Was it 2 years ago, a year ago? Al Burke was trying to get me to come out there one year. Great guy. You know, I usually do the New England Fan Fest, which is based in Rhode Island, and I do the Wrestling Classic every year in Springfield, Massachusetts. It's about 45 minutes from my house. I'm in Connecticut. So, you know, I love doing stuff like that, hanging around, and, you know, I do a little bit of commentary myself. I just lied. I do a lot of bit of commentary for several different organizations between Connecticut and Massachusetts, and it's a lot of fun being on that, and you know, helping with production and ideas and stuff like that. So professional wrestling has got me, so to speak, even though I got into it a little bit late. You know, I've been a lifelong fan, but being a part of it, you know, I joined like really late in life, I guess you could say.
Well, you know something, Rick, when it comes down to it, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're able to get in the ring or be involved when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, or, I mean, guys like our age and things like that. I mean, one of the biggest things you always remember, DDP, WWE Hall of Famer, said that he wasn't able to get into his ring till his mid to late 30s.
Yeah. And I remember him in AWA as a manager, you know, managing a Bad Company, you know. Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. Paul Diamond and Pat Tanaka. And when you sit there and look at it, I mean, again, before he ever got in the ring, he had that stint. He had the opportunity to drive Greg Valentine and the Honky Tonk Man to the ring at WrestleMania 6.
Yep.
I mean, there's so much stuff that they had that ability to do. And I mean, again, it's one of those, once you get in, you never want to leave. And again, hopefully if everything goes according to plan, I hope there's still plenty of more energy in this tank as we go along, because I mean, again, when I see guys like a Herb Simmons, like the late Burt Prentice, who spend their entire, Les Thatcher's another one, who spend their entire life being involved in the world of professional wrestling. If I can say that I've accomplished even a tenth of what they've done, I'd be a very happy man.
Yeah. Herb's putting on some great shows. It's my, and I'll be honest with you. I think I've said this before. It's my favorite weekly television show is the SICW. It reminds me of the wrestling I grew up with. Yeah, I think, and I had I had Lucky P. Larson on just about 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry right now. I know for a fact hearing the stories from my friend Dr. Drew, that probably had to be a very long interview, but again,
it wasn't too bad. I think it just went about an hour. Maybe we might have cut it, went about 10 minutes more because like I said, I usually cut a time limit. So, it was fun because he was half in character, half not, you know what I mean? But, he's always a character that I really enjoyed watching on that television show.
Well, you know something too. And I mean, again, looking at professional wrestling here in the St. Louis area, I'm a level with you. And again, this is not Luke Roberts, Media Dynamo Pro, or any of the podcasts that I'm affiliated with. As a professional wrestling fan in the St. Louis area, I know that you've been following the situation that just took place in the last couple of weeks where Stephen E. and his Devastation Incorporated. I didn't want to tell Herb because Herb's a great friend of mine, but I was scared that they were going to be able to win and take over. I mean, again, when you have Attila Khan, the International Bounty Hunter, Haku, and the Barbarian, I mean, you had Ron Simmons, Danny Boy Hawkins, Gary Jackson. I mean, if anybody's going to carry the banner for SICW, if they're going to go into a fight when your back's against the wall and your company's on the line, those three men were able to be successful. And again, when you look at it, you've got promotions like SICW, you've got promotions like MMWA who've been around for 40, 50 years, Dynamo Pro, which I'm affiliated with. If you go back all the way to the Gateway and to the MRW days, they're looking at nearly 30 years. You've got WLW, which is nearing 25. You've got places like St. Louis Anarchy that have been around 20, 25 years. When you look at it, that's one thing. In St. Louis, you got all these different avenues of professional wrestling. If you want to watch people flying and doing 2.5 flips into cross bodies, great. If you want to watch wrestling as it was when we were growing up, the hard-hitting, gritty action, the chain wrestling, then you've got wrestling like the SICWs, like the MMWAs, like the Broadways. That's one thing that's great. Doesn't matter if it's St. Louis, New England, Northwest, Texas, Florida, there's always going to be something for everybody. And that's what makes pro wrestling, whether it's 40 years ago or now, that's what makes pro wrestling so special is whatever is your cup of tea, you can find it in your area and enjoy it.
Absolutely. Luke, I want to thank you for being a part of this show today. And I definitely want to have you back soon because I feel like we just scratched the surface. Because I think we can go and get a lot more conversation out of this, but we're nearing our deadline here. So I want to thank you very much for being a part of this, and I'm glad we finally got to get this done. And I'm sorry I made you wait a little longer than I should have.
You know something, Rick. One of the things I always say is card subject to change, and I know full well what's there. And again. I want to say thank you to Pro Wrestling Wire for having me here on the program. And again, the names that you've mentioned to be along that list of individuals who've graced this program definitely has been something here that's, I mean, again, it's something I'm going to hold very special. And again, when you look at it, most people at my time would be like, okay, I'm going to start slowing things down. I'm going to start chilling out. Oh, no. I mean, I got Dynamo Pro Wrestling's New Year's Brawl on the 4th in Farmington, Missouri, New Year's Revolution for the MMWA on January 11th, where they're going to be inducting members into the MMWA Hall of Fame, New Beginnings for CHWA on the 18th of January. You can also catch me on the Wrestle Talk podcast every other Tuesday night, whether it's behind the boards or on camera. Also, Sunday, June 22nd, Andres Banquet Hall in St. Louis. Independent St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame. It's going to be a great night. And I'm going to tell you right now, And I'm just going to level with you because you're talking about being in New England. We've got people coming in from West Virginia. We got people coming in from Florida. I got a friend of mine, longtime promoter friend, Jeff Manning, who's talking about coming in from the greater Salem, Oregon area. I'm going to tell you right now, Rick, if you had the opportunity to make that journey down, I would guarantee you not only would you be able to have a seat, but we make sure that you had plenty more memories to carry with you. And who knows, maybe we can go ahead and we can put this into Pro Wrestling Wire. I always think about my good friend, the man who put the podcast together, the late Rick Rose. And it was one of those, he made a vlog from leaving Kansas City all the way down to St. Louis to catch a Dynamo Pro event. Maybe that's what we need to do for Pro Wrestling Wire. Hook you up, get you down here from the great Northwest and experience St. Louis. And I'll tell you right now, Toasted Ravs, Emo's Pizza, you name it, a lot of great things. Gooey Butter Cake, you name it, a lot of great things here in St. Louis. We'll make it a point that if you can get down here, we'll make sure to take care of you as only the St. Louis wrestling scene can.
Oh, I'd love to come. I'd love to come. We'll talk about this more. I thank you again. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, make it a point. Check out Pro Wrestling Wire. They got lots of great interviews, lots of great wrestling news. You can check them out online and make it a point to enjoy the best in professional wrestling right here on Pro Wrestling Wire.